Hey, Ryan Reynolds here. Wishing you a very happy half-off holiday because right now Mint Mobile is offering you the gift of 50% off unlimited. To be clear, that's half price, not half the service. Like, Mint is still premium unlimited wireless for a great price. So that means a half day, yeah? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
The clock's running out on December deal drops at Lowe's, but there's still time to wrap up something they'll love. Shop great gifts under $50, like the DeWalt Elite Series 100-piece bit set. Plus, if you order by 2 p.m., you get same-day delivery by 8 p.m. Shop December deal drops while you can. Lowe's, we help, you save.
Of the 4 main ingredients that go into pretty much every batch of beer, there is one that seems to get the most focus. To the point, it's led to the creation of a handful of modern styles, or perhaps spins on a classic style is more accurate there. Anyway, you all know what I'm talking about. Hops. And in order to get the most out of them, brewers have come up with some clever techniques for using them. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and I'm joined by contributor Andy Carter on this episode to go over a couple of these methods.
Yeah, I think if you think of American brewing and home brewing in the last 20 years, it's defined by hops. Hops have accelerated the American IPA, Pale Ale, now Hazy IPA, and all the derivatives thereof. And hops are the key part of this, and utilizing hops for their maximum flavor, not just their bitterness, is key to all these styles.
Absolutely. Now, while I might lean a little bit more heavily into less assertive styles like pale lager and British ale, I definitely love a good hoppy pale ale and IPA. In fact, my go-to currently is Sierra Nevada's Celebration Ale, which if you have not had any yet this season, it is the best. Go get you some. It is great. I can't be certain, but I'm pretty confident Sierra Nevada employs the use of dry hopping and possibly hop stands as well. And I look forward to going over the results of an experiment we did comparing those two methods. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live brew day with a Brülosophy contributor, or a live Q&A with somebody in the brewing world. You can learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Huge shout out to all of our current patrons for helping us to continue producing this content. We could not do this without you. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd appreciate that as well, as it helps those who haven't heard of us yet to more easily find the show. Plus, we really do appreciate knowing what you think. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240-volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are awesome. Efficient, easy to use, with a relatively small footprint. You are not going to be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear, or even just reasonably priced kettles and other gear, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know Brülosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener and friend of Brülosophy, Havo Murillo, wrote in with some feedback after listening to episode 89, where we focused on fermenting with kettle trub. Havo said, when you mentioned where brewers get the idea that less trub is better, it reminded me of something I read in a treatise on the brewing of beer by E. Hughes, written all the way back in 1796. When talking about the advantages of having a false bottom, he says, the false bottom will drain grains drier than the tap vase, and in the fixed bottom there will be a sediment left, which with one bottom only would have passed through the top vase, and part of it accompanied the wort down into the tun. This will answer another good purpose, for the sediment not accompanying the wort into the copper, it will want less boiling, as it will break sooner and fine itself. The book The book itself is in many ways nonsense by today's standards, but it shows how some of these ideas can survive until today. It took everything in me not to go into full-fledged like early American accent there. But what do you think, Andy?
I mean, these make sense. I mean, I think what's funny about these papers, let's just say that this book, I'm sure it was lauded at the time, but it reminds me a lot of our own homebrew, ways of looking like, hey, this is happening. Can I change it somehow? And I think that some of the words there are funny because boiling is kind of shared between boiling, and then fermenting is boiling too, and so there's a little mixed messaging there, but anyways, it makes sense. I think in the end, like we talked about in that episode, or you just mentioned, was we want to maximize yield, and putting more trub into the fermenter is just never going to yield you the most liquid beer to drink. So we have seen good results, faster fermentations, lower finishing gravities, so on and so forth, and some flavor positive elements, but in the end, I'm trying to maximize the amount of beer I make every single time. So
yeah, and for me, when I think about kettle trub, I feel like I've talked about it over and over again, so I won't go into too much detail here, but it is an interesting topic in my mind, and I view it as almost being more of a technique for improving the clarity of your finished beer. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, we have shown over and over and over again that when you ferment with a decent amount of kettle trub, that beer ends up being clearer than the same exact beer fermented with less kettle trub. And that's fascinating to me. Now, for me, some trub is good, none or too much. I wouldn't say it's bad, but it's just not for me. I like to ferment with a little bit because of the nutrient qualities of trub.
For sure. And it's clarifying agents and other things like that. I mean, there's a lot going on in there. So, and it's more work to remove all of it, right? Why work harder? Work smarter.
Exactly. But I do think it's cool that all the way back in the late 18th century, people were thinking about this in what seems to be pretty much the same way we do. So thank you for that feedback, Havo. If you have show feedback, you could send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. Well, don't forget to pick up your Brülosophy merch. The options are much more vast than they've ever been, with everything from t-shirts and hoodies to hats, fanny packs, phone cases, and so much more in the Brülosophy shop. You can check out all of our goodies by heading to brülosophy.com/shop. That's SHOP, and then clicking one of the product images, which will take you to our Dashery store, or you can just go straight there at brülosophy.dashery.com. Huge thanks to all of the people who have purchased some of our merch over the last few weeks. We really do appreciate it. We'll be right back.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brülosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to xchillerator.com today.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. I brewed my first IPA just a couple months after picking up my gear kit. This was like 23 years ago. And while I recall using a ton of hops in that beer, I don't remember if I even dry hopped it, as our focus back then seemed to be more on bitterness than it was hop aroma and flavor. At least that's how I remember it. Anyway, it was only once I started brewing down here in California that I really began to learn about and embrace these later hopping techniques, particularly dry hopping, which actually isn't a new technique at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think a lot of American style brewing, it takes a little bit from German brewing, a little bit from English brewing, Belgian brewing. It's an amalgamation of things. But one thing that is clear from the history of brewing, and especially brewing hoppy beers, is dry hopping comes from a British style of technique. And for our purposes, we're going to get deep into this episode, but for our purposes, dry hopping is when you're adding hops at some point during or after fermentation.
Yeah, I think that's key. A lot of people view dry hopping as being a very specific, I maybe in this day and age they don't, but that, you wait for a certain amount of time during fermentation, then you add your hops and that's your dry hop. But it can really, as long as you're throwing hops, into the fermenting beer or fermented beer, we're going to call that a dry hop. Yep. Obviously, when we're designing experiments around that, we are going to pick a specific point to do it, and that's just how we are. And we might even test out, claims about adding it at certain points. But just for the definition that we're relying on for this episode, a dry hop is just adding hops at some point during or after fermentation.
Yeah, and so some of this really stems back all the way to the 18th century when British brewers were brewing beer, being shipping across the world to their different colonies, would add relatively large amounts of hops. At this time they only had whole cone hops or dried hop leaves, and then they would add these to the casks or to the fermenters, and then that beer would be shipped, and this would help preserve the beer a bit longer than if it didn't have it. Yeah,
I think that's one of the cool qualities of hops is this preservative aspect to them, and that's really what was being leaned into back then. We weren't there, obviously. I wish we could Bill and Ted's ourselves back to Burton-on-Trent, whenever this was being developed. But I'd be curious if those brewers had any forethought as to whether or not that hopping was going to lead to this crazy obsession that people now have today. If they knew that they were lighting the fuse all the way back then, it's interesting to think about.
Well, it is fun. It is a little bit, and just think about it a little more, adding it and doing it. Of course, they're going to notice the flavor and aroma aspects.
Right.
But, if you read papers back then, they talk about the freshening power of hops. This is, again, these old timey terms. And I think what they're saying there is they're retaining some more quality and freshness as the beer ages. So another benefit, like we just said, is there's a pungent hop aroma, even with these noble continental noble hops. I mean, you think about any lagers and German lagers, they're fairly hoppy. And then that term dry hopping is widely believed to come from the fact that hops were added to a cask that had not been boiled, and hence they're going in dry. So they're not wet hops. By wet, I mean they went into the kettle for bittering purposes.
And you have to qualify that now, because wet hops nowadays means that they're fresh off the vine without ever having been dried. So the processing side, there's wet and dry hops. But when it comes to beer, when we refer to dry hopping, we're just talking about taking hops that have yet to be used in the brewing process and throwing them in, which is an odd thing. I remember when I was learning about brewing IPA, 20 years ago or whatever, and this term comes up and I'm like, but they're not dry when you put them in there. You're getting them wet. Why are you calling it dry hopping? Mm. Well, the idea, again, from the old school, is that you're adding these hops that haven't yet been used, which leads me to wonder, were people using like boiled hops at some point, for this preservative thing? Probably.
Yeah. So let's go through what we think is kind of a good collection of technique for dry hopping. So the first, what you would add hops when clearly all fermentation has subsided in the beer. You've reached finishing gravity, but you've not packaged it yet. There's definitely one huge negative to this, which is a cold side oxidation risk. Anytime you're opening your beer up to any type of external thing, when there is no active fermentation, you're just running risks in terms of rapid aging of the beer. And I think this is a big negative.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that really, we're kind of jumping way ahead here, but that really motivated my change. The change in the approach that I take to dry hopping was, not only was I noticing cold side oxidation, I didn't know that's what it was for a long time, but in these dry hopped beers, what I was noticing was that these beers would kind of start to change color and start to take on an almost sickly sweet characteristic that I did not like. And so as we're exploring, I mean, we're lucky because we have an excuse to experiment. And so if we toss a beer because it turns out bad or whatever, that's okay. Because the aim was the experiment, was trying to, compare these two methods. Well, for me, nobody likes to spend $50 on a batch of IPA just to dump it down the drain because it's terrible. Bad. And so I'm trying to figure out ways to improve this thing. And somebody comes along and says, maybe you should dry hop earlier in the process. And I remember hearing, I believe it was, who was it? Matt Brynildson from Firestone Walker talking about, his big thing. I don't want to get this wrong, but I think it was him who was saying that, we'll go until there's about, 4 degrees Plato left to ferment before. That's when we'll dry hop. And then you start hearing about these hazy IPA brewers who are dry hopping at high krausen, which just means that you're at 2 to 3 days into fermentation. You've got this big fluffy krausen on the top of this fermenting beer, and then they're adding their hops then. I mean, that was like blasphemous when I first heard about that, because we were all waiting to the tail end of fermentation to add those dry hops. Why would somebody, this is rhetorical in some ways, but why would somebody opt to add dry hops besides, mitigating the risk of cold side oxidation, which is the bane of the hoppy brewer's life? Why would somebody choose to add dry hops at high krausen?
Well, one idea, and this is still, I think, a little bit of a lab experiment, but there's data is coming out now, is that potentially the yeast interact with the hop oils when they're actively fermenting to do something called biotransformation. Yeast, that's what the best understood microorganism, or best understood organism, period, single cell organism we understand. It has DNA inside of it that can take flavors and make them new flavors. And I think this is an active area of interest here. There's another reason, and I would call it, is the potential for dry hops to add enzymes and a little bit of sugar that can restart and provide a little secondary fermentation or tertiary fermentation that can actually restart some diacetyl production. And having the yeast around can try to minimize that as much as possible versus a tail end fermentation. Yeah,
for me, when I think about dry hopping at high krausen, like you mentioned, my mind goes directly to this idea of biotransformation. It is a well understood, a reaction that I don't understand terribly well. We'll put it that way. It's kind of you're kind of putting your faith in the fact of it happening, unless you precisely that this yeast has been tested with this hop variety, and you know what I'm saying. It's we've done some stuff, and just to put it out there as plainly as possible, all biotransformation is it takes these hop oils or these terpenes, and through a chemical reaction with the yeast being in contact with those oils, it biotransforms into something else. So I think the common one that I've heard the most is that linalool transforms into what's called citronellol, and you get that really juicy, ostensibly that really juicy citrus character that you might not get otherwise. And we're not going to spend too much time focusing on biotransformation, but just to say that dry hopping at high krausen, very popular. It's something that I probably do more nowadays, when I'm brewing, than I do waiting to the tail end of fermentation like I used to, because of the mitigation of cold side oxidation. That to me is the most important thing. There is another approach that I've used many times, and to good effect. Surprisingly, the first time I did it was an absolute mistake, but the outcome was so good that I've done it before. And that's actually adding your dry hop charge when you're pitching your yeast.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, then that would just be the simplest, just like set it and forget it level. Like, right, I'm already cool. I've got my yeast in it, and then just add it all at the same time. It makes total sense. I mean, it's just, it's just there's these positive aspects and negative aspects, and I think there's some interesting discussion there too.
Well, and you've got a lot of people who are just wholly convinced that the duration with which those dry hops are in contact with the beer has and I'm not saying I disagree with this. I'm just saying there's a lot of people who don't disagree with this, who actually believe wholeheartedly that, if you throw your dry hops in and leave it for 24 hours, the evidence, that some newer evidence is showing that you're extracting most of the desirable oils in that time frame. So you can only do a 24-hour dry hop. Well, if you're throwing in a bunch of hops at yeast pitch, that, those hops are going to be in contact with that beer throughout your entire fermentation phase. So that might be 5, 6, 7 days.
Yeah.
Is that creating, some flavors that may or may not be desired? Who knows? What I've found is that it works really well. And my thinking is that, well, it kind of captures the best of all worlds, right? You're adding it in at pre-yeast pitch or at yeast pitch, so no worries about cold side oxidation later on down the line. They're in there for high Kreuzen, so throughout fermentation. So if biotransformation's happening, it's going to happen there. And then, like I said, you're not opening your fermenter to add more hops later on. You're packaging with it. You can remove the hops if you really want to, but you get that nice extraction time. To me, it's actually a really neat and underutilized technique for creating a really hoppy beer. Now, there is another method that we have some people, some ex contributors who used this very readily, and that was dry hopping in the package, which is a keg in our case.
Mm-hmm. That makes total sense. I mean, if you want to just get it, I mean, this gets to the Randall, which was the inline hop extractor for keg service, famously done by Dogfish Head. You want to bring those.
Yeah.
If you think the freshest hop is going to be right when you drink it, then that would be the best. So I think we should go into hop stand, the other side to this coin. And I think in many ways this is similar to what people would call a Whirlpool edition or flame out. And Whirlpool, for those that just own homebrew equipment and have never seen professional equipment, the Whirlpool is a separate vessel where you separate all of the hot break, cold break, and the late edition hop from the wort, because you're going to go through a plate chiller in a big system, and you're not going to be able to do an immersion chiller. So you got to actually make a pretty liquid system and not just hop batter. And so,
you're not going to be pushing all that hop matter, especially nowadays when most brewers, I think, are relying on pellets. I mean, it just creates this sludge that will clog up, your downstream stuff. And so, but I do want to make sure that we distinguish hop stand from Whirlpool and flame out. I think a lot of people use those terms interchangeably. To me, all three are unique. They're all very different. So when I think a lot of people do view a Whirlpool and a flame out as being the same thing. And in my head, a Whirlpool, mostly used by commercial brewers, is, it's when you're actually whirlpooling the wort at the end of the boil. It stays hot. The idea was that wort in a commercial brewery, that wort, you've got so much volume that it stays hot enough to still isomerize alpha acids, thus contributing bitterness to beer. Well, what I was reading, and I have, friends who are professional brewers who still do this, they realized when we add all these hops at the end of the boil, we're still getting a lot of bitterness. So we need to reduce the amount of hops we add in the kettle, to account for this additional bitterness from these Whirlpool additions. And they're actually whirlpooling the wort. So to me, that's a whirlpool. On the homebrew level, you can try to whirlpool. It's not as easy as people make it sound. I mean, I've tried with a spoon. I've tried with pumps. It's really difficult to create that unless you're doing like 20-gallon batches. Then for some reason, the volume makes it easier. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's a surface area to volume ratio of the kettle to the liquid, for sure. So, not going to be pretty tough,
So to me, though, a flame out edition is very homebrew. I mean, that all you're doing is you turn the flame off in this day and age, you turn the power off.
Yep.
You toss in a charge of hops and then you start chilling your wort. And it might be, 15 minutes and you're ready to put it into the fermenter. But you're adding a flame out edition. So similar concept, but different applications. So Whirlpool is named what it is because of what you're actually doing. Flame out, same difference. I think to me, Whirlpool is kind of the commercial term. Flame out is kind of the homebrew term. Now, a hop stand is different. And the main difference with a hop stand, at least as I understand it, is that you are going to pre-chill that wort to a certain temperature before you bake your hop addition. The idea being, or at least one of the ideas being, to get underneath that isomerization temperature so you're not contributing any more bitterness, as well as reducing the temperature such that volatilization doesn't occur. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But is that your understanding of a hop stand as compared to like a Whirlpool and a flame out?
That's 100% what I would say. And this is something as I'm reading this, I'm thinking about my process. And my process is almost all hop stand because I want to be able to extract as the price of hops goes up, as the unique hop varietals are harder to find, I want to maximize the utility of each one. And I also found, especially when I liked a certain hop, like a bag, like I would get the pound bags, right? And if I found that bag was really good, I would make sure to utilize it that way just to maximize its flavor potential.
Yeah, and a lot of people are doing that nowadays. Again, the theory behind this is that by dropping that temperature, of the wort below these volatilization points, these hop terpenes are less likely to go away. All right, you're going to keep them, you're going to retain them in that wort, and thus they will be there in the finished beer. Now, you can't talk about this, and I don't want this to sound like I'm, dogging on hop stands, but you can't really talk about the importance of a hop stand without going over at least some of these hop terpenes and their, approximate boiling points. So let's start with what I feel is the most popular, most hoppy of the terpenes, which is myrcene. It's kind of what hops smell like all the time. This is that terpene that's going to contribute that kind of tropical citrusy. By citrusy, we're thinking like grapefruit, but also that green hoppy, herbaceousness that we're also familiar with. The boiling point in Fahrenheit of myrcene is 331 to 334 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 166 to 168 C. Boiling temperature of wort is 212 Fahrenheit or 100 C. So I get a little bit confused by this idea of reducing the temperature to 170. It makes sense in terms of the isomerization piece, but when people start, kind of leaning on this idea that, we're going to retain all these terpenes. I mean, let's look at what one of the cool, I've got a list in front of me. One of the coolest, by cool, I don't mean like rad. I mean like actually cool. Boiling points for a terpene looks to be 225 degrees Fahrenheit or 107 C. And that's humulene. I mean, that's that earthy kind of spicy, woody, terpene. I don't understand the argument that reducing the temperature is in some way going to retain these when the boiling point is higher than wort boiling temperature already in the first place.
Yeah, I think some of this goes to the fact that when these calculations are done, especially boiling, so matter goes through phases, solid, liquid, gas. Boiling is that transition, or roughly that transition from liquid to gas. And, when these are put in compounds, right, if these were done in isolation in a lab, I had 100% jar of humulene and I put it pressure and temperature. It's how they're used within a liquid phase, right? Because most of this is going to be a water phase with some alcohol. And I think that that's what it's getting at. And just because you're boiling, if you're below boiling, you can still be modifying these things. So I think if you look at this chart we're looking at from 200 Fahrenheit to roughly 400, the lower it is, the closer to boiling, there's some overlap. I mean, I get it. And I do agree with you. It is questionable. The logic is questionable, but I can also see the other side that, there is like a transition period of these things. And many different things are going around during the boil. There's not just one activity going on, which is hot liquid to cold liquid. I mean, it's complicated. So, I mean, I see both sides. I do tend to agree with you though. Like, I think the lower the temp is lowering the temp. The other thing I'll say is, we do want to, I think in the hop stand, at least in my mind, if I want to separate my processes out, I want to talk about the bittering hops and I want to talk about the flavor hops. I don't want these hops to necessarily add so much bitterness that my whole recipe's out of whack, right? So there's that. Like lowering the temperature is going to lower isomerization. So.
I don't know if we've done so many experiments. I can't keep track of every single one of them, but something I've often thought about, I bet there's an experiment out there for this, but is if you did a 60-minute, let's just say not 60-minute, let's say you're doing a 30-minute boil and you do a 30-minute addition, of let's say an ounce of Simcoe. That's a good bittering hop in my opinion. You throw in an ounce of Simcoe at 30 minutes, let it boil, and then immediately chill it and ferment it. If you compared that to a wort that you boiled for 30 minutes, threw in that same amount of Simcoe hops at flame out and let it sit, not boiling, but hot for half an hour, if you would get that same level of isomerization, because the density of that wort, it's going to stay warm for a decent amount of time, above isomerization temps at least. It does make me wonder, I feel like the main reason people would perform a hop stand is to avoid further isomerization, but wouldn't it just be easier to reduce your kettle additions a little bit? I mean, I guess you get more, one could argue that you get more out of an early kettle addition than just bitterness. I would tend to agree with that. but probably not that much more. I don't know. It's just something I find really curious.
It's interesting. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the style that was focused on in the experiment we're going to get to in the next segment. It's a very unique style that very few people have ever heard of called IPA. So it's let's yeah. So the BJCP describes American IPA as a decidedly hoppy and bitter, moderately strong pale American ale. The balance is hop forward with a clean fermentation profile, dryish finish, and clean supporting malt, allowing a creative range of hop character to shine through. I think it behooves us to talk a little bit about the evolution of IPA here, because I feel like a lot of the modern hopping approaches, particularly when it comes to dry hopping and hop stands, were developed almost as kind of an answer or a response to the growth and popularity of American IPA and the realization that what it is that people like about this style isn't just the bitterness and being able to talk to your friends about, you know, how bitter you made a beer and that you could deal with it when nobody else could. I've had those conversations, but it really was about hop expression. And man, you know, how do we coax as much of those delectable hop oils out of those hops as possible to create this bouquet that's not bitter, that doesn't, you know, peel the enamel off your teeth. When I hear the term American IPA, I do kind of think about a slightly darker, maybe due to a small amount of caramel malt, which is, you know, terrible to say out loud these days. But American IPA to me is that. It's like Torpedo or, you know, Celebration Ale, I would call a red IPA, but you reduce that redness a little bit and you're right there in American IPA realm.
Well, I would argue that Celebration was one of the first American IPAs, honestly. I mean, they do, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale being Pale Ale, right, in you know, the beginning of this, but, you know, then they did Celebration, and I believe Celebration's always been marketed as an American IPA. So I would say that is the beginning. I mean, there's other ones out there. We'll come to them in a second. But if we think about the evolution of IPA from single IPA to double IPA with, you know, Vinny Trillerzo and Pliny the Elder, and then the focus on hops and the focus on hop technique, and then you keep going and you say, okay, well then of course triple IPA, and then these are the clean IPAs. But then
double IPA,
because of the continuous desire for flavor, and then the idea that maybe bitterness isn't all it's cracked up to be, that's where you get into hazy IPA. And then now we're going, you know, I would say the continuous evolution of IPA, especially for breweries that have trouble marketing their IPAs. Well, hey, we do use lager yeast. Let's call it a cold IPA or India Pale Lager. And so we just keep going down this road where I think people are just trying to get different versions of the same thing, which is a very hop expressive thing, but I want to change the background. I want to play with the bitterness. I want to play with the underlying flavors. I think a great example of this is Black IPA. It's actually one of my favorite IPA variations. And what was so interesting about Black IPA was it came out of the scene very popular, and then everyone stopped buying it. So all these breweries, Stone, really a classic example, Sublimely Self-Righteous, they had that as a year-round beer, and then they killed it, and then everyone complained that they killed it, and then the brewer, Mitch Steele, said at the time, when's the last time you bought a six-pack? And everyone's quiet. He's like, yeah, that's why we killed it, because no one's drinking it. And other breweries like Firestone Walker, Wookie Jack, they're all seasonals now, so you get it once a season, you sell through it, and that's it. So not every style works, but again, the focus being on the hop expression and then letting the other notes tell you something. Hazy IPA lets you do yeast. Lager IPA lets the malt come a bit more, and that lager, clean, crisp lager flavor. And then other versions of this just allow you to play in that space where you're just solely focused on hop flavor.
Yeah, and you know, as I think some of us kind of laugh or scoff a little bit, you know, lovingly, of course, at the fact that there are so many different sub-styles of IPA. But the reality is, in my opinion at least, that if it weren't for that motivation of brewers to continue pushing, you know, the boundaries on what it means to dry hop, what it means to hop stand, how can we extract more of these good characteristics, I don't know if we would have, you know, the knowledge that we do on creating these hop forward beers. I mean, it's just wild how hoppy these beers can be nowadays. So, you know, whether you like a Black IPA or not, you know, at least let's honor the fact that, you know, it was through the innovation of these brewers that we got to the point where we know how to make these beers that are just crazy hoppy. Now, over the years, I have brewed a ton of IPA, American, West Coast, hazy, red, black, brown, white, whatever, you know, you name it. If it's a sub-style, I have likely made it. And in pretty much every case, I've employed dry hopping and or a hop stand. Well, curious of the impact either of these methods have when used on their own, we put it to the test. Results when we're back from this break.
I've got Dan Morgan here on the pod. Say hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going today?
It's going good, man. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Dan Morgan. I'm an attorney and a managing partner at Morgan & Morgan, which is America's largest injury law firm.
That's pretty awesome. Why do you guys think you win so many cases?
The insurance companies and other companies that we go against know that we're going to take it to the end, that we believe in the case. So we fight for every dollar, and we're not afraid to go that extra mile for our clients.
Are insurance companies actually afraid of you guys?
We don't bluff. We take it to trial, and we are not strangers of getting very, very, very large verdicts.
Awesome. So how does someone get in contact with Morgan & Morgan? What would I do if I got into an accident?
Probably the easiest way is dialing pound law. That's pound 529 from your cell phone. And our call center is always waiting to take your call. 24/7, 365.
Wow. Dan Morgan from Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Thanks for coming by the show.
Thanks for having me.
Visit forthepeople.com for an office near you.
Okay. Only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There. The last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. I was first introduced to the concept of the hop stand back around, I think it was like 2015, 2014, maybe it was even earlier than that. Again, I'd been dry hopping for years, but I was reading this article in, I believe it was Brew Your Own magazine, and I believe the brewery that they were referencing was Abita Brewing Company, which is, I believe, in Virginia. But regardless, they were talking about how this commercial brewery had shifted away from dry hopping, likely to avoid cold side oxidation, and was employing this technique referred to as the hop stand, which involved reducing the temperature of the wort to 170 degrees Fahrenheit and then adding a ton of hops. And I had their IPA and I really liked it. So of course I'm thinking, man, I'm going to adopt this method. And I soon realized that, it is actually a little bit more work than dry hopping. You have to monitor the wort, as you're chilling it. And back then I'm using a propane, burner. And so anybody who's tried to maintain a temperature with a propane burner, good luck. It's very difficult to hold it steady. Now, obviously with these electric brewing systems, it's a lot easier, but I was, like I said, I was a fan of this brewery's IPA. So I was giving it a shot, and the results were good. I wasn't convinced, though, that it was any better than dry hopping. Well, a couple years ago, contributor Paul Amico decided to test it out for himself.
Yeah, so let's go through Paul's recipe in this experiment. So he did a single 10-gallon batch of IPA in a 240-volt clawhammer supply unit. His grain bill was 65% pale malt, 32% Pilsner malt, and 3% C40. Pretty much classic IPA recipe, I would say.
Yeah, well, I will say classic American IPA recipe circa, 2010.
Sure.
This is definitely not a West Coast IPA. I think with West Coast, you'd see 100% Pilsner malt,
Sure.
or maybe 65% Pilsner malt with a little bit of pale malt. Definitely no caramel malt, though, so keep that in mind. But again, we were going for that classic American IPA for this experiment.
Yeah. So then brewing, single infusion mash, keep it simple, 151 Fahrenheit or 66 degrees Celsius for 60 minutes. When the mash rest was complete, he removed the grains and proceeded to boil the wort for 60 minutes with the following hop schedule. At 60 minutes, he added 9 grams of Cascade Lupomax, so that's a different product than just pellets, right? It's been created to maximize that hop flavor in the Cascade, plus 6 grams of Mosaic Lupomax. At 15 minutes, he did 11 grams of Cascade Lupomax, and also another 8 grams of Mosaic Lupomax. And then at 5 minutes, he did 16 grams of Cascade Lupomax with 12 grams of Mosaic Lupomax.
So, Andy, have you used Lupomax yet?
Yeah, no, I think definitely played with it. Typically, I think when it first came out, they gave you little packets of it. It's super, much denser, you can smell it. It's just ripping aroma. So it's pretty nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna provide the definition that Haas has created for this. Just to put it, that Lupomax is a concentrated lupulin product. What it does is it concentrates the amount of lupulin, so they look sort of like a slightly yellower version of a regular T90 hop pellet, but they are way more pungent. You can use 30% less Lupomax than you would a T90, and you'll get the same result. But the cool thing is, if you use a little bit more, you're just going to get a more pungent hop result. We've had great success with Lupomax. I love this hop schedule. It's very simple. It's a simple blend of similar ratios throughout of Cascade and Mosaic, which in my opinion work beautifully together. So at this point, we're looking at a really arguably fairly basic. Yeah, he's using a modern hop product, which is cool, but a really basic IPA recipe.
Yeah, that's also important. There is less grams here than you would expect from a typical T90. So keeping that in mind. So the first variable, when the boil was finished, half the wort was chilled with the Accelerator Max counterflow chiller during transfer to a fermenter, and then the rest was recirculated until it reached 170 Fahrenheit or 77 C, at which point the hop stand was made. He added 28 grams each of Cascade Lupomax and Mosaic Lupomax for this hop stand.
Yeah, so he's sticking with the same hop varieties, which is cool. But just to be very clear, he had 10 gallons of wort. He chilled half of that with using his Accelerator Max, which is a counterflow chiller, on its way to the fermentation vessel, and that one was going to be that was reserved for the dry hop. So that one's fully chilled. When 5.5 gallons made its way over to that fermenter, he then started to recirculate the rest of the wort until it got to 170, and then he set his claw hammer to maintain it at 170 degrees Fahrenheit or 77 C with that hop stand addition in it for 20 minutes. So you got this one wort that's still sitting at 170 while the other one is already chilled and ready to receive the yeast. Now, one of the things that we do just to keep things as clean as possible is we will hold off, we want to make sure that both batches are treated as identically as possible, which can be difficult, but he's letting this wort sit in his, fermentation chamber, the dry hop wort, throughout the hop stand process, and then he pitched his yeasts at the same time. So they had the same fermentation time, same yeast, all that stuff.
Yeah. So following that 20-minute hop, that hop stand, the wort was chilled all the way down and then put in the fermenter. And then the OG, we would expect no difference in OG between the two. The OG was 1065. Each wort received a pouch of Imperial Yeast A09 Pub, fantastic, and were left to ferment at 66 Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius.
Let's real quick. Anybody who has not, I know there will be some people out there who hear that we made an American IPA with an English ale yeast. I'm telling you, this is something, again, I picked up from Firestone Walker. I believe they ferment Union Jack with the same source strain, at least. Fuller's.
Many of the early American IPA people were using English yeast. I think that's a big misconception. Yes, you go double IPA. If you go double IPA, you use English yeast, you might get too many esters. But for lower alcohol IPA, I think it's important. There is something to it. So yes.
And it's something special in my opinion. It's absolutely my go-to for American IPA. I highly recommend it. You're going to want to watch your mash temperature if you really want to dry that beer out. But anyways, great yeast for that. So again, we did the hop stand already. Now, once that was done, after 20 minutes, he finished chilling that wort, put it into the same type of fermentation vessel. They're sitting next to each other, pitches the yeast, and then fermentation starts. Now, 3 days into fermentation, Paul comes back and he adds the same amount of hops that he added for the hop stand. He added that as the dry hop into the other batch of beer.
Yeah, so that was 3 days that dry hop was there, and then it was there for 10 days. So after fermenting for 10 full days, so since the start of pitching in 10 days, so you're getting this, now we have to really be careful, right? So one batch was just hop stood and ferments for 10 days by itself. Another one, 3 days after the fermentation starts, and then goes to 10 days total. And then we're going to rack these things off. So 10 days in, hydrometer measurements were taken that indicate a very slight difference in FG. The recirculated batch was at 1016 FG, and the non-recirculated was 1017.
1017, 1018. I'm curious what your thoughts are on, do you think that's a function of the variable? I mean, these worts were identical with the exception of the variable. So I don't see why adding, hops at 170 degrees Fahrenheit for a 20-minute stand would increase fermentability. That seems odd to me.
No, I think both. I think we're looking at this data here, and I'm pretty certain this is in the measurement error. There is no specific reason. Now, I mean, there is data from other papers that suggests your dry hopping can do things to beer, maybe negative things to beer sometimes. But the data here, I think, is in my mind is a measurement difference. So it's just error measurement. So.
That's right. And who really knows?
Yeah.
But I am wholly convinced nobody can taste the difference between a 1018 FG and a 1016.
We've also shown that you can have many difference in gravity points and have no difference in flavor or perceptible flavors. So yes, I think we would need another digit after the 17. We would need 17.5 or you need another digit. That's just science. That's my scientist brain saying.
We're taking it out to millionths.
Yeah, to millionth. Yeah.
So these beers were finished fermenting though, and he let them sit a little bit long, I think 2 more days longer, before he pressure transferred them to CO2 purged serving kegs. Again, we're going to do that every time as a matter of course to reduce the risk of cold side oxidation, especially in hoppy beers, which just seem to have this sensitivity to oxygen exposure.
Absolutely.
So he's got these 2 full kegs. He puts them next to each other. Now, mind you, just to clarify, the dry hopped beer was 4 days. He did a 4-day dry hop. So that to me is kind of middle of the road in terms of duration. It's certainly not 20 minutes, but we were testing these 2, methods, and that seems to be a fairly average approach by dry hopping for 3 to 4 days. I don't know.
And I would just say this is a method test. This isn't like a precise, chemical analysis, because that's what we want to do, right? We're trying to make experiments that can be replicated in a home brewing environment. We don't have gas chromatographs. We don't have, a bunch of analytical chemistry at our disposal, right? What's practical? The practical way is you're either going to make a beer with a 20-minute hop stand, or you're going to dry hop it, or you're going to do both. But separately, what is each contributing to the beer? That's what we want to understand.
Bingo. I couldn't agree more. So these beers are next to each other in Paul's kegerator. He's got gas on them. So I believe he burst carbonated overnight, then reduced the pressure to serving pressure, and let them condition for another week. I'm looking at the photos. I mean, to me, they look more or less identical. I guess if you kind of squint a little bit, the dry hopped beer has just a tiny bit more haze. I had these beers in my hand comparing them, and I couldn't, I'm looking at them at the time going, these look pretty much identical. I would expect the dry hop beer to be a little bit hazier, but in this case, they weren't that bad.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and I wouldn't expect more than a slight difference in haze. Now, big changes could be from oxidation or something like that, but of course, this brewing technique is solid, and I would not expect that to have occurred here. So let's go through Paul's data. So Paul did his own semi-blind triangle test. He did 5 tests, and out of those 5, he got them right 2, which is low, right? It doesn't seem to very, very perceptible. And he even claims he could not detect a real difference between the 2 beers.
Yeah, and either could I. I'll just get out there right now. When I was sampling these beers, we don't take the actual triangle test. We don't put our data in the form that we use, but we do it for fun and to report back. And he served it up to me, I think 3 or 4 times, and I just could not tell them apart. To me, they tasted identical. But of course, that's not what matters. What matters the most is what do participants, who don't know what the variable is, how do they fare when it comes to the triangle test? So he served this one to 26 blind participants. Again, they had no idea what the variable was. Out of those 26, 14 would have had to identify the unique sample for us in order for us to say with at least some level of confidence that, it really does seem like these methods, do something different, that they impart a perceptibly unique characteristic to these beers when used on their own. So 26 participants, 14 expected. How many actually got it right?
14, which makes it statistically significant by our metrics. They could tell these beers apart. Yes.
That's right. So in this particular experiment, we could say with, again, just a modicum of confidence, we could say it really does seem, based on the stats, that the amount of people who were able to tell these beers apart kind of is more than what you'd expect by chance alone. And since we know how clean Paul's process was, we can kind of lean on this idea that it was probably due to the dry hopping, or hop stand. That being the variable was likely due to that. So can we speak to what that difference was? No, that's not what we're testing. But I did taste those beers. I talked to Paul, who also tasted them. He and I couldn't tell them apart. Again, there's always a possibility of a false positive. That's just, you got to include that in it. That's stats in general. I don't think necessarily that that's the case here, just because I couldn't tell them apart, but I do think that it's worth thinking about what was different. And in my experience, the dry hop beer tasted versus, the hop stand one. I mean, I couldn't tell them apart. So, to me, since I couldn't tell them apart, I just don't view them as being that big of a, as either having more of a bigger impact than the other. But with it being a significant finding, then maybe there is something to it. I don't know.
So yeah, of the 14 tasters, so when we go through that test and we go and ask people, of the people that could detect a difference, because we test them in the spreadsheet, they will be routed to some more questions. And when they chose that odd beer out, 4 of them preferred the hop stand beer, 9 preferred the dry hop, and 1 had no preference there. So I think that's interesting, and I think it keys on what you just said, Marshall, that the dry hop beer came off more commercial or more dry hoppy or more what you expected versus the other beer.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that it came across that way. I perceived it as being that way, and then when drinking the hop stand one, it wasn't that much different to me.
Oh, okay.
So to me, what I'm saying is, I should put it much more simpler. Dry hopping is a lot easier, in my opinion, especially if you're doing it at yeast pitch.
Sure.
Than chilling the wort, adding hops, waiting another 20 minutes, chilling it the wort the rest of the way. To me, it's just easier to throw some hops in during fermentation if it's going to create that nice, expected hop character without the hassle. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. And like you said, you were talking about the preference data. Again, we only ask the 14 people who got the triangle test right to give us which one they liked the most.
Yes.
9, a vast majority of the people who got it right chose the dry hopped beer. So even if there is a qualitative difference between these that I obviously didn't perceive, either did Paul, people seem to like the dry hop one better than the hop stand beer. Those who did ostensibly, perceive a difference. So yeah. I don't know. I think it's interesting data.
I think it's also kind of to take it. I kind of use these things. Okay, so there's some good data here. There's something I can lean on slightly, right? And I think it's cool to say, okay, well, there was a difference. What if I did them both, right? Like just do both of them, right? And then what am I getting? Now, of course, there could be diminishing returns, right? 2 + 2 does not equal 4 necessarily here. It might only equal 3 just because, or even less, or even just 2 + 2 = 2 because a person can't perceive a stronger hop flavor. It would be more interesting to say, is it a different quality? But we didn't get into that. Of course, this is not a much more rigorous panel analysis of flavor where you have everyone tasting the same thing all the time, right? So there is that, like, hey, there's a difference. Maybe combining them will lead to some new product. But it's cool. I mean, I think it's actually more interesting because we can talk about it for talking to you and saying like, oh well, these are the same, which is kind of confirm some of our suspicions that adding them hot or adding them in a dry hop is similar. And it just comes down to your technique and preference, as in, especially for you, right? If you yourself can't taste a difference, then I pick the method that's going to suit my manufacturing techniques the best, or versus another more esoteric technique. So
yeah. The method that fits my life better.
Yes, exactly.
That's how I think about it. Well, and I remember chatting about the whole hop stand idea, not in the context of this experiment, but with just some local friends over some beers at a pub a while ago. And one of the comments that actually got me thinking was the reason I do a hop stand. My buddy was saying is because if you take you have a dirty plate, you just ate dinner, or whatever, you got this dirty plate, and you go and you run that under cold water. It'll wash some of the stuff off, but when you turn that water up and it gets hot, it cleans a lot better. It's going to remove more of that gunk. Well, his argument was, the hotter wort is going to dissolve or, extract those terpenes better than a, cool beer will.
Sure.
And my argument was, yeah, but alcohol kind of will do this. It's going to, it's a solvent, so, but I get the idea. And I think what a lot of people nowadays are doing is implementing both at the same time, because again, the goal nowadays is as much hop character as you can get. So why not throw everything in the book at it?
Sure.
And I think that's fair. I think it's perfectly fair. I personally hated the process of doing hop stands. I haven't used that word yet in this episode. I had to save it for the end. I hate having to pre-chill that wort and just to do a hop stand and then holding it there for another 20 minutes. When I'm done with the boil, I want to be done. You know what I mean?
I hear you.
So for me, I'm just sticking to the dry hop and I'm happy with the outcome. If you get something more out of doing hop stands plus a dry hop or hop stands over a dry hop, by all means, keep doing it. I think it's awesome. So, well, we've got some reader comments to get to. The first one comes from John, who says, what's at work with the dry hopped one having a higher final gravity? I would have expected it to be slightly lower, if anything. This actually made me think about this concept of hop creep, Andy, and what I've at least picked up on how it happens. And it's usually associated with a dry hopping. And so, yeah, I'm kind of with John. I guess if anything, I would have expected them to have the same exact final gravity.
Yes.
I found even the 2 specific gravity difference to be kind of interesting. But if there was going to be a difference, I'm with John. I would have expected the dry hopped one to be a little bit lower than the hop stand one.
100%. And those that haven't heard about hop creep, you can read about it. And our good friend Kay Job has been looking into this as well. So that hop creep is the idea that when you dry hop, enzymes and potentially sugars are being released from the hops themselves and then creating a nether fermentation. And this can lead to some deleterious effects, not only a difference in final gravity, if you care about that specifically, but really adding diacetyl or acetaldehyde to your beer that will not be removed. And I had spent many years with my good friends in my homebrew club dealing with this problem and battling it. And it really came down to the fact that if you use certain yeast strains, which I will not claim, I will not state here what yeast strains and which companies are making those yeast strains, but if you use those yeast strains, you always got diacetyl during dry hopping versus others. And that was a big problem for us. There's a lot of research on this. And the funny part of it is we're getting into it now, or as humans looking at this now, this was known more than 100 years ago. The original papers about this are almost 100 years old. So it's pretty funny that we just have rediscovered it. But I agree. It should have been a lower, if it's the right yeast strain, if it's the right kind of mix of hops, your FG should have come down. So again, I attribute the difference in finishing gravities here to measurement error, and that's it.
Yeah. Obviously, it wasn't hop creep, but something, there was something different. It could have just, I'm with you. I'm actually going to go a step further and just say, sometimes the best response is, I don't know. I have no idea what caused it.
Also a perfectly fair response,
And it's only 2 specific gravity points, so nothing really to worry about. All right, next comment, final comment comes from Eric Branchard, who says, years ago, I tried replacing all of my dry hopping with various hop stand time, temperature, and quantity combinations. Been there, Eric. No matter what I tried, I found that something was lacking, so I've since gone back to dry hopping, though often in combination with a hop stand. I find that I get more aromatic punch and a different flavor contribution from dry hopping than hop stands. That kind of speaks to what you were saying about not that, these things are doing something majorly differently. It's that they're contributing different qualities, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's 100%. I think everything in technique in home brewing is personal preference and then what qualities you're looking for. I really love hoppy beers. I think in my course of home brewing, I've never been as happy with my hoppy beers as if I just got a commercial beer. So, my techniques of brewing, I tried everything. I did everything under the sun. And I think the biggest impacts I noticed from my hoppy beers was not just the hops I used, but the yeast I was pairing them with. And that's where I think the biggest deltas it came from. But still, I really appreciate the commercial beers. And I think the commercial beers were always getting better, like consistently better. And that was just, my way of doing it. But for home brewing and, you're messing around with stuff, try things and then find your preference, right? But make big shifts. When we do commercial manufacturing of semiconductors, we do what's called design of experiment, DOE. Design of experiment, as was relayed to me by a director at my company, he's like, the design of experiment to measure the sample space, you're looking for things to fail and succeed. You're not just looking for successes, right? If you know how to fail, you know what direction not to go. And if you find that hop stands, first word hopping, pick whatever preference you want, pick whatever technique you want. If you're finding that's not working for you, don't go that way. Go the other way, the direction. So,
yeah. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap this up. All I have left to say is that, if you're after the hoppiest thing you can get, maybe do both of these. If you're happy with the beers that you're making that are just dry hopped, then stick with it. That's where I'm at. But you've got so many different options. I love the fact that we, as collectively as brewers, have come up with so many of these methods, which really do. I should say we're inspired by the brewers of yore, whose shoulders we stand on. And I just think that's really, really cool. And hoppy beers are going to be here forever. And these are the ways to make them. So don't forget to check out the rad content that Martin's creating over at the Brülosophy Show, which you can subscribe to at youtube.com/@the Show. That is the @ symbol followed by the Brülosophy Show, no umlaut needed. And as always, you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brülosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.